The Secretary of State says Americans have never been safer as 3 suspected terrorists are taken into custody in New York City. This is Special Report. Good evening. Welcome to Washington. I'm Brett Baer. We have new signs tonight of how much the Obama administration wants to minimize the potential impact of the upcoming speech to Congress from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And at the same time, a bold statement by this country's top diplomat seemingly minimizing the threat of terrorism and other forces to Americans. Chief White House correspondent Ed Henry sorts it all out for us tonight.
Secretary of State John Kerry declared today Americans have never been safer, despite dozens of beheadings and burnings by ISIS terrorists, on top of the same militants abducting at least 70 Christians, including women and children, in Syria just yesterday.
Despite ISIL, despite the visible killings that you see and how horrific they are, we are actually living in a period of less daily threat to Americans and to people in the world than normally, less deaths, less violent deaths today.
Kerry made that claim the same day the Justice Department arrested 3 men who were planning to commit acts of terror around New York City if they could not travel abroad to join forces with ISIS. The complaint alleges one of the terrorists offered to kill President Obama if ISIS ordered him to do so, while another planned to shoot police officers and FBI agents if they blocked him from joining ISIS in Syria.
If they were not able to go, that they would seek to acquire weapons here, handguns, machine gun.
That came as Republicans charged with crises from the Russian invasion of Ukraine to the spread of ISIS across the Middle East. The president lacks a coherent national security strategy.
It's a matter of a failed, feckless foreign policy that began in 2009, and the chickens are coming home to roost.
Also on the radar today, Iran's Revolutionary Guards blew up a replica of a U.S. military ship as part of war games in the Strait of Hormuz. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, speaking to Congress next week to warn about the dangers of a weak nuclear deal with Iran, was hit with new barbs from 2 of the president's top advisors.
By virtue of the invitation that was issued by the Speaker and the acceptance of it by Prime Minister Netanyahu on 2 weeks in advance of his election, is that on both sides there has now been injected a degree of partisanship, which is not only unfortunate, I think it's destructive of the fabric of the relationship.
The Prime Minister, as you recall, was profoundly forward-leaning and outspoken about the importance of invading Iraq under George W. Bush, and we all know what happened with that decision.
Today, Netanyahu insisted again he will not back down.
I respect the President of the United States, but in such a fateful matter that can determine if we exist or not, it is my duty to do everything to prevent this great danger to the state of Israel.
Meanwhile, retired General John Allen, the president's key envoy in dealing with ISIS, testified to Congress today that the terror group's advances are being blunted. Brett?
Ed Henry live on the North Lawn. Ed, thank you. We're a little more than 48 hours away from a possible shutdown of some elements of the Homeland Security Department. The real issue, however, in dispute is not terrorism, but immigration. Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel tells us where we are tonight.
On this, the yeas are 98, the nays are 2.
Facing a Friday night deadline to fund Homeland Security, the Senate voted to move forward with only 2 conservative defections after the majority leader noted time is of the essence.
I will offer a clean substitute and work to expedite consideration of the bill as amended to get it back over to the House this week. As
lawmakers address both funding Homeland Security and defunding President Obama's executive orders from November, the president is going on offense. And his Democratic allies on immigration offered this preview of his town hall appearance tonight in Miami on Telemundo.
There really is nothing the Republicans can do or say to make the Department of Homeland Security or the president deport someone in a world of finite resources if it is not in the national interest of the country to do so.
Yet despite that stick in the eye to the GOP, a former Republican Homeland Security Secretary urging funding didn't stay on the administration's script.
The president has gravely overstepped his constitutional authority. The Republican Party has every right to challenge that. But I don't think we right that wrong on the backs of the patriots that go to work every day to provide safety and security at the Department of Homeland Security.
While Harry Reid is no longer the majority leader in the Senate, he has sounded focused on trying to take over the House.
If the House of Representatives, led by Speaker Boehner, is interested in doing a funding measure for the Department of Homeland Security, it has to be one that has no tricks, no riders.
Meanwhile, federal district judge Andrew Hanen says a group of 26 states suing to stop the president's unilateral action has until Tuesday to respond to the government's request that he lift his temporary hold on the immigration plan moving forward. That would be after lawmakers presumably work out a funding extension.
I believe that the judge's decision in Texas was a bad one, but it is one that gives them face-saving way to just get this job done, pass the funding until the end of September.
Yet with 30 House conservatives writing to their leadership urging, quote, now is the time to stand firm against these unlawful executive actions, Speaker John Boehner isn't tipping his hand.
I don't know what the Senate's capable of passing, and until I see what they're going to pass, no decision has been made on the House side.
I'm told lawmakers have been advised they could work here all weekend if necessary, and sometimes that alone is enough to resolve a congressional standoff rather quickly. Brett?
Yes, it is. Mike Emanuel live on the Hill. Mike, thanks. President Obama is threatening to veto a Republican bill to fix the widely criticized No Child Left Behind law. Republicans say the bill would restore local control in schools and essentially end what's called Common Core. The president and Democrats say it abdicates the historic federal role in education of ensuring the progress of all students. The internet, as we know it, may be about to fundamentally change. While there are many people who say not for the better, the politics of this change are playing out this week here in Washington, with the administration, left-leaning FCC members, and top Democrats in a full-court press to get it all completed. Correspondent Peter Ducey continues our coverage with this report.
The government regulates your health care, your roadways, and your airways. Up until now, the internet has operated without much interference, but that's about to change because tomorrow the FCC will likely vote to slap 332 pages of new rules on the World Wide Web.
They want cities or governments to be running these networks, and they equate them to roads, which most roads are publicly operated and publicly funded.
If the internet is regulated like a road or a utility, people will notice. First, slower broadband, then less investment, which means fewer broadband choices. That's according to critics of the plan, using similar rules in Europe as a model. Just hours before the FCC votes on these new regulations, 0 members of the public have seen them. The FCC chairman, Democrat Tom Wheeler, says that's a long-standing practice. And that's about all he's saying, because Wheeler was a no-show for scheduled testimony on Capitol Hill today. A spokesman tells Fox, quote, the chairman has agreed to testify, but given the short notice, he requested to appear before the committee at a later date. So the hearing was postponed, but GOP lawmakers are still curious about how involved the White House was in writing these rules, with Congressman Jason Chaffetz and Fred Upton complaining, quote, as Chairman Wheeler pushes forward with plans to regulate the internet, he still refuses to directly answer growing concerns about how the rules were developed, how they are structured, and how they will stand up to judicial scrutiny. Lawmakers haven't seen the regulations either, but Democrats are applauding them as a way of limiting the ability of internet providers to sell so-called fast lanes or slow lanes of service.
Wow. That is not how the internet should function in 2015. But that's what the internet could look like if the broadband barons get their way.
Republicans are saying a law passed by Congress would be far more appropriate than a regulation. Senator John Thune has a bill, but to pass it, he needs some help.
But it's going to require that some of these Democrats that have been giving us the stiff arm at the encouragement of the administration decide to come to the table, and hopefully they'll work with us.
But instead of asking 535 elected members of Congress to set up new rules for the entire internet, the administration wants 5 political appointees at the FCC to do so. And unlike political fights over issues such as immigration or the budget, this could impact everyone with an internet connection. Brett?
Broadband Barons. Sounds like a softball team.
There you go.
All right, Peter, thank you. A judge in Texas has sentenced the killer of American sniper Chris Kyle and his friend Chad Littlefield to life in prison without parole. Prosecutors successfully portrayed former Marine Eddie Ray Routh as a troubled drug user who knew right from wrong. Routh's attorneys say he was suffering from psychosis at the time of the killings. Up next, why even President Obama could not get his buddy Rahm Emanuel over the hump in Chicago. First, here's what some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. KTBY in Anchorage as Alaska quietly becomes the third state to legalize recreational marijuana. Supporters are comparing it to the end of prohibition. Adults can now keep and use pot, as well as transport, grow, and give it away. Commercialization, regulation, and taxation are expected in a year or so. Fox 29 in Philadelphia with some amazing dash cam footage. Look at this. Investigators say natural gas leaking from an underground main traveled into a New Jersey home, built up in the basement, and exploded when it came in contact with an open flame from an appliance in that house. 15 people were injured. And this is a live look at Phoenix from our affiliate Fox 10. The big story there tonight, the fate of convicted murderer Jodi Arias. Her sentencing trial went to the jury earlier today. She could get the death penalty or life in prison for killing her former boyfriend in 2008. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back.